All right, everyone, it's 1 minute past 1 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. For any of the folks that do show up a little late, they will have an opportunity to see the webinar. We do record these. But first and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Welcome to the latest in a series of webinars from B2W Software. Today's webinar is about building solid cost structures inside of B2W Estimate. So a couple of housekeeping items and the agenda here. First and foremost, my name is Tom Willey. I am a Senior Solutions Engineer for B2W Software. I've been working for the company for about 13 years, coming up on 14 in March. I started here as a product trainer and then moved on to head up the implementation team for a while. And then I ended up as a solutions engineer where I do most of the product demonstrations. With me and riding silently in shotgun position is Mark Hooks, who is also a senior solutions engineer. Had a very similar path, started as a product trainer, did implementation, and is now a solutions engineer. Mark will be monitoring the questions panel. So you'll see in our agenda that we have a spot at the end for Q&A, but we do encourage questions along the way. So as folks are interested, they can ask questions in the questions panel. Mark will be monitoring that. If it's a niche question or something very specific that might be something that just gets answered directly to that question asker. But if it is something that pertains to the topic and it's beneficial for everyone, we'll do our best to answer that in the context of the webinar so everyone can hear the question and the answer. So do feel free to ask those questions along the way. So just as by way of an agenda here, we're going to take just a couple of minutes and do like one slide of overview about what it is, building solid cost structures in B2W Estimate, why we're here, why that matters, how it can help you out. And then we'll actually look at the specific features that we're going to show, kind of bullet point them out, and then we're going to jump right into the demonstration. So the PowerPoint will last just a few minutes. So, we have a central database of resources to look up with labor, equipment, materials, specialized functionality. These are kind of some of the basic features of the software and some of the reasons why people will invest in the program. But what we're going to do is go quite a bit further and look at some of the overlooked features and functions of the software. So again, some of the more common things that people tend to overlook even after they've been using the software for a while. So hopefully this is going to be something where there'll be benefit for, really everyone, both new users that are still kind of getting accustomed to the software, as well as folks that have been using it for some time. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but in essence, because we continue to add functionality to the software, it's very common that folks that have been using the system for a while, software continues to grow, so they continue to have new capabilities added, and that those capabilities are just added along the way, and they don't get the benefit of them. So what we're going to be looking at today is really these 5 features. One, we're going to be looking at trucking. So there's some capabilities that have been added into trucking that people will be able to help to leverage better cost templates. And then we'll be looking at things like named factors. We'll also be looking at the ability to use cost codes to your advantage. And then we'll be looking at a comparison cost method. So a specific cost method that is oftentimes overlooked that can combine detailed and subcontracted together. And then we'll be looking at a feature called Summation. So there's the ability that's specific to work breakdown structure, and that's an enterprise-only feature, but we'll look at that. So I'm going to jump right into the software here. We're just going to go through those one at a time. So I'm going to go in, and really what this is all about is making sure that these templates that we build in the background, that they work for you. So leveraging these templates to do as much work as possible ahead of time so that you're not having to do repetitive tasks and repetitive changes inside the estimate itself. So the first one that we're going to look at is trucking templates. So a lot of folks know that you can add trucking into the system. What some folks don't know, because this feature was added maybe after they implemented and purchased the software, is that we continue to add functionality, and one of them is named trucking types. So you can actually go into the background of the system, and under cost components here, you can create named truck types that will pre-populate the capacity and the cost. And so you can essentially choose from these named truck types rather than having to manually enter this information for each structure that you use it in. Now, that is one part of the benefit, but another part is that we've also increased the number of things that you can connect trucking to. So in terms of building a solid cost template, I'm going to go into asphalt paving by the ton here, go to the detail tab. Now I've got my trucking component, but on the right-hand side, we can really connect quite a bit more in terms of automating this template. So first and foremost, I could leverage that truck type. So if I primarily use 10-wheelers, I can have the capacity and the cost already in place. But the other two often overlooked things are the ability to connect it to a crew and also to a material. So by connecting it to the crew, you're going to be pre-populating the work hours per day and also the total number of days. So in other words, it's going to pull that from the crew when it's in the estimate. And second of all, you can connect to a material. Now what that does, you'll see the quantity up here. You could connect that quantity to the task if you wanted to. But by connecting it to the material, you're really leveraging the exact quantity of the material itself, inclusive of waste. So if that material already has a waste percentage on it, then the trucking will know that that's the amount of material that needs to be brought in. So now that we've linked all those together, again, we've kind of built a solid cost template that automates as much as possible. Let's actually go into an estimate. Looks like we just had a question. How do you create a crew of material linked components? I might need a little clarification on that. Are you asking if you have a number of materials linked together? I'll look for maybe a little more detail and I'll see if I can answer that as we go. Until then, though, what I'm going to do is go into an estimate, and I'm just going to show you how we leverage that new kind of solid cost template. So now if I go inside this estimate that I've been working on, and I want to go into, say, a particular pay item, like this 2-inch asphalt paving here. I'm going to go inside, and I've got asphalt paving by the ton, and you can see I've got my material in here. And if I've connected that together properly, I can go into the trucking calculator here. You see it's connected to the highway paving crew, and it's connected to the quality of material there, which is the asphalt base. And so if that material happens to have a waste percentage here, we'll see, if I go back and look at the task itself, that even though I have 5,500 tons at the task level, it's taking into account the waste for the trucking there, and it's going to be 5,775. So and then you can see those two quantities, the quantity and the quantity with waste. I can also see here from my highway paving crew that it's at 6.88 days. And if I go into my trucking calculator, it's done the same thing. So I've got that 6.88 days. All that I need to do now is really just put in the round trip time, and then I have my trucking calculated for me. So being able to automate a few more of those steps is really just less work for you on the back end. So that's the trucking template. What I'm going to do now is go back, and we're going to look at the named factors. So I'm going to go into a different item here. And what we'll show you is a couple of things. So as folks probably know, they can enter in factors to help describe the quantity of a child template. So for example, here, if I go and look at this concrete slab, I have to price it out by the square yard, but I really think in terms of placing cubic yards. And I could go in and I could set a value, and I could enter a factor. So if it was 0.16, whatever I wanted to put in there, I apply that factor. And so I can put in the square yards, and it gives me the cubic yards. However, for a lot of our clients, many of these factors are repetitive, and they really want to standardize on them. And they want to kind of understand where that factor came from. So for example, if I have a series of these conversions, I can, as you've seen in the past here, store them. So just like I have those named truck templates, I can also have named factors. And so I can put in a description of where I would use that factor, and then I can put in the specific factor that I want. So for square yard to cubic yard at 6 inches of depth, I could then say, okay, well, I just want to apply that factor. So I go in and set the value, and now instead of entering the factor, I choose from a list. And now I know that I'm using the right factor for the job. And I also know that it's using a company standard so that everyone is essentially singing from the same hymn sheet. I put in my quantity, and it calculates out my cubic yards for me. So that's another kind of useful thing to help speed up and make your cost templates more automated, more solid. Another one that's really often overlooked is the ability to leverage what we call cost codes. And so very frequently, I would be able to set up the system, and a lot of people have the goal of exporting out to accounting, but it tends to be something that they put on the back burner, or maybe they want to think about their cost code structure and they don't really leverage it. But being able to take an estimate and simply export it out into a format that could be used for your accounting system is, again, really leveraging the power of these templates. So again, in the background of the system, you can store a lot of that information. So you can store what we call job cost IDs. You can have a meaningful description to that. And then you can store your accounting code in the background. And by applying it to the templates, so back in items and resources, that assures that when these templates are brought into the estimate, that they already have their accounting code put in, and they're really ready to export out. So let's say, for example, I have this pay item here, 8-inch copper pipe by the linear foot. I can apply that cost code. So I simply go into the detail tab and click from the drop down. Let's just say that the code is pipe. It'll put in that code 2400 for me. But it's also important to understand that we can apply those codes at different levels. Different accounting systems have different levels of detail. So you could be applying this code at task level or even crew or cost component level. And that, again, kind of empowers these templates to be much more useful, because that's that much more work you're not going to have to code in the item, in the estimate itself, or dropping the estimate out into Excel and manipulating it. So make those templates work for you. Put in the codes as well as all the other cost-saving maneuvers. One of the last two features that we'll look at is one called comparison method. Now, this is a cost method. So if I go back and look at my list of items, we talk about the cost method. So plug is the lowest level of detail. You just jam in a number and you're done. Detail is when you use your cost resources to define the cost of that item or task. And then we also have subcontracted, when you're not going to perform it yourself, you're just going to get quotes or put in a subcost. But there are times when a lot of our clients might self-perform something, or they might subcontract it out, and they may want to make that decision at the time of the estimate itself. So what we allow you to do here is, if I go to the detail tab, rather than just have it be detailed or just have it be subcontracted, the comparison cost method lets you pre-populate it with your costs, but also potentially get a cost from a subcontractor. And so you can compare, do I want to sub it or do I want to self-perform it? And you can simply toggle back and forth. And if you go to subcontracted, you're not blowing away or losing the detail from the self-performed details underneath. And so you can switch back and forth pretty much whenever you want. Now, that's useful in and of itself. Again, for any of those things that you sometimes self-perform and sometimes sub out, leverage that comparison method. But that also empowers something else later in the software. So if I now go into my estimate again, you should know that those comparison templates can be used in Subcontractor Management. And in fact, you will see yourself as a potential option to choose. So I've got that silt fence comparison cost method. If I now go and look in Subcontractor Management, as I'm looking at the erosion control group and doing a quote comparison, I would be able to see the cost of my forces, in this case, $1.66 per linear foot. I would be able to see that as compared to the other subcontractors. So I can compare subs and what it would cost for me to do it. If I'm only doing comparison on some of the items, but not all, then any of the other items would use a plug price, so that, again, I can compare apples to apples. You'd also be able to see yourself, the self-performed, listed under subcontractors, so you could see, what it is that you're actually looking at for a cost comparison. And so if I choose myself or a sub, I would also be able to see that back in the estimate. So once I go back into the actual program and the estimate itself, and I look at silt fence, you can see that erosion control is kind of grayed out. And that's because I'm using the subcontractor on that. I'm using Southeastern Clearing and Grubbing. But at any time, I would be able to see what I put in for my costs, what I compared for subcontractors, and again, I'd be able to switch back and forth from within the subcontractor management system. So that's another great way to improve your templates. One of the last ones that we'll show, in fact, the last one, is the summation feature. So summation is something that's specific to work breakdown structure. So I'm going to go into the item in WBS database here. And just very briefly, work breakdown structure is an enterprise-only feature. So if you are a professional or a basic client, then you won't have this capability. But if you're an enterprise client, you will have the ability to turn this on. Even for enterprise, looks like there's a quick question here. Is there a quick way to see in which bid package a comparison item has been put? There is. If you go back to subcontractor management, there's really two ways of looking at that. So you would be able to see at the self-performed, you'd be able to see the bid packages here, so erosion control or painting, and you can see which ones there are there. Or again, if you look in a particular package, you would see which ones are self-performed. So those are two ways that you could see which package they're in. Going back to the work breakdown structure, if you have the enterprise edition and if you have enabled this, this really provides a completely different way of creating estimates. So instead of a single flat list of pay items, this is really more about building it in a project management centric way. You can build the cost of your estimate around a project management methodology of project, division, subdivision, sub-subdivision, etc. And so the classic example here is really the CSI master format, where you have very well-defined divisions. And so you have this breakdown where you have a nested, coded hierarchy. The 16 division format, the older version, 16 divisions. So in division 2, you have subdivisions, basic site materials, site prep, etc. And so you can create this hierarchy that really represents how you would think about creating an estimate. And you can dynamically choose what level you want to price your bid at. So you can have a lump sum for the whole project, but you can also switch a toggle and then create a price at the division level or all the way down to the terminal level. So a completely different way of thinking about and creating estimates. The specific feature that we're going to show you here that really can help you drive more powerful templates and leverage what it can do is a summation feature. So what summation allows you to do is, rather than have the parent drive the quantity of the children, it actually allows you to do the reverse. So I'm going to have these cost templates here, and you can see that my water supply has a series of tasks in it, 12-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, and 16-inch. And in reality, what I'm going to be quoting out, or what I want to show at the terminal level, is really just the sum of whatever I have in here. So without summation, I would have to put in whatever these quantities are, 200, 100, whatever it is, and then manually add that up and put it into the sample quantity to make sure that they match. And then I have to make sure that they're in sync. What the summation feature allows you to do is say, look, I want to set the value of that field, and I want it to be a summation. And so it will take any of the fields underneath that are of the same unit of measure, and it will automatically sum them. So now I can simply enter in the quantity of the child templates, and the parent will automatically add up. So it's a great way to make sure that those two are consistent, but even a little bit more than that. So for example, I might have something in here, kind of one of these things doesn't belong, like silt fence. So I might have another structure within that I want to put on both sides. I'm going to put silt fence on both sides of the water line. And so that's a linear footage, but I can see that it's adding to the quantity. That's not really pipe, and so I don't want that. You have the ability to say, look, I want to exclude that from summation. And so now, even though there is a linear footage task in there, that particular line is not contributing to the summation total. It is also smart enough to exclude things that are not of the same unit of measure. So I can have the number of shoes here. I can just manually enter that, and that does not enter the quantity. So much faster and more efficient to have a parent quantity driven by the sum of the totals at the bottom. And again, you have control over which ones contribute and which ones don't. So that's a pretty good overview of the 5 features in our 30-minute expert series here. Just very briefly, I'd like to kind of promote the next webinar. So coming up at the end of February, we'll have one for customizing field logs for specific requirements within Track. Just like you saw all the flexibility that we have in our cost templates in B2W Estimate, there's lots and lots of flexibility in the Track program. So this will be a great way of seeing some of the capabilities that we have there to customize our solution for the problems that you're facing in the field. Also, as a quick reminder, all of the webinars that we do have been recorded. So for any of your colleagues that maybe weren't able to make it today, they will have the opportunity to view this webinar as a recording. So anyone that has registered for the webinar will receive a link to the recording when it's finished. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.